So I would like to welcome everybody tonight to our GEO Talk. We started these talks a while ago. Actually, we had our beautiful Nikki Florio already presenting to us about the wildfires, forest fires. And so I'm very, very, very honored to see her as well. But I would love to welcome our featured guest tonight. His name is Peter McIsaac. And for some reason, just not long ago, one of my friends here, she's on our talk here as well. She goes by Sherry. And she sent me again a link, and I revisited the interview. Peter, you were on an interview with Dr. Rainer Füllmich, the German lawyer,
Yeah.
who unfortunately now is in jail in Germany, innocent. But anyway, he's going through a nightmare at the moment. But I'm very, very humbled and honored, Peter, to have you on our talk tonight. And yeah, so revisiting always is a good thing. So then we can connect again and reconnect. And yeah, so let's get started, Peter. So please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about the forest fires in Canada.
Yeah, so I'll keep this short, guys. So my background is I was on the east coast of Canada here in Nova Scotia. I spent 29 years inside the provincial government as a provincial game warden, wildlife specialist, and professional forest firefighter. And I've been incident commander on uh, actually maybe even hundreds of fires and fought fires, up in that 60,000 acre range, something like what happened out in Jasper. And I fought fires all across Canada. And when I retired from natural resources, I went on to do a bunch of other things. I'm a best-selling author. I produced hunt fish television shows, and I also got involved in politics. And why I got involved in politics was because when I worked inside the provincial government, we lied to the public every single day. I want to make sure everybody understands what I'm saying. As our official operating procedure, we lied to the public about important matters every single day inside the Department of Natural Resources in Nova Scotia, and all other government departments did the same thing. And so, when I deal with major press things, they say, "Well, no, that you couldn't have lied that much," but we didn't outright lie. 10% of what we told you was outright lies, but 90% of how the government lies to the public is by omission. We never tell you the whole story. We'll tell you enough of the story so the government always looks good. Because if you knew what really happened and the level of incompetence of some of the things that happen behind the scenes, you'd be at politicians' door with pitchforks and torches. So I got involved. Naively thinking in politics I could make a difference, and then I realized that's not the route to take. Although we did come up with a solution, but anyways, that's my background. So I began to speak out, and how I met up with Rainer Fulmick was last year in Nova Scotia. We had the largest forest fire in the province's history, and the federal government tried to tell Canadians it was based on climate change. Well, it wasn't. It was arson. Just straight up, it was an arson case. And because of the amount of aerial spraying and weather manipulation we've had here on our east coast, and major cuts to our forest fire fighting budgets, that fire grew to the point it was a $200 million disaster for Nova Scotia. And my wife and I found ourselves in a position where I had all my gear packed, and we were set up to be evacuated from where we lived. And I said, "Well, this is insane." So I called some of the guys that I used to work with before I retired, and they said, "Pete," they said, what can I say on here? I don't mean I don't want to swear too much, but the facts are the facts. They said, "This is the biggest shit show we've ever seen in our lifetime." They said, "We're understaffed. We don't have our equipment." They said, everything that we had predicted is coming to pass, and it's happening all at once. And now we've got a second fire front. So I put together a team of recently retired forest fire fighting professionals, and we offered our services to the province, to the premier and the head of Department of Natural Resources. And I did that 5 consecutive days. Now, we were turned down 5 consecutive days in a row while homes were burning to the ground. The same as what just happened out in Jasper. And, I had the premier's private cell phone number on my phone. I mean, I could make calls into his office, and they flat out would not return calls and absolutely refused to hire a team of overhead experts. And, you know, homes were burning down and they were crying for help. And the reality of it is that a lot of what happened should never happened. And so that interview ended up getting 177 million views worldwide. And that's how I met up with Reiner Fullman. Some of his people in Europe saw this video and said, we should track down this McIsaac character from back in Nova Scotia and see what's really going on. And I'm in a position, because I've done law enforcement and forest firefighting, and because I'm involved in private business, I'm one of those guys who people say you're kind of dangerous when you don't care anymore. And so I really don't care what I say, because there's nothing they can do to me that I'm concerned about saying. So I'm not politically correct. So if I say anything here to upset anybody, I'm giving you a trigger warning right now. Is that warning they call? I may say some things that might upset a few people, but the reality of it is I'm known for speaking the truth, and I won't back down from anybody for any reason. So that's a little up. That's how I got here.
Wonderful. Yeah. So obviously there's something going on. So why and how do you think that geoengineering influences the wildfires?
So there's more to it than just geoengineering. Geoengineering is a part of a bigger picture. You have to remember, folks, that the federal government has hung its future and its hat on the climate change agenda. And in order to facilitate climate change, the climate change agenda, where the government is authorized to tax us into oblivion with a useless carbon tax, they have to provide the groundwork or the fertile soil for forest fires, uncontrollable weather, that non-predictable weather, and a number of different things. And because without the geoengineering, this, like down here in Nova Scotia, we're being sprayed like bugs. It's nonstop. I mean, you can't spend a clear day where you can't see geoengineering spraying taking place overhead. And the biggest issues is that we find is what's happening is the federal government's, the man who runs, what is it, the Department of Environment, I think they call it Department of Environment and Climate Change now, it's been renamed. The guy's name is Stephen Gilboa. He's from Alberta. And I don't mind telling Steve to his face, the man is unhinged and he's not stable. Some of the things he's saying, I mean, Steve Gilboa has zero credibility left in anywhere across Canada. And you got to remember, he's a convicted criminal because he's willing to break the law to push his climate change agenda. So most people aren't aware that even the RCMP, I have to give a bit of a history lesson, and you guys can interject at any time. And if you don't, I'll just keep talking, right? But so what happens with the part of the geoengineering when it comes to spraying our skies and spraying us like insects in the soil, that's designed to drive that narrative that allows the government to be able to carbon tax us to the point of billions and billions and billions of dollars. And if they withdraw from that, they basically lose the number one topic that they've hung their hat on in order to retain power in Canada. That's how they won the last election. And they're crying about it today. Well, we need to save the environment. And so I'll give you guys one stat, and then I'll let somebody else speak up in regards to this. But excuse me, the Canadian government, Stats Canada, using AI, was able to figure out a couple of years ago that we have 318 billion trees in Canada, 318 with a B billion. Each of those trees absorbs on average 48 pounds of CO2 annually. That means Canada's forests, we have the third largest forests in the world. Those forests absorb over 15 trillion with a T, 15 trillion pounds of CO2 annually. Well, here's the story, folks, is Canada only produces 1.32 trillion pounds of CO2 annually. It only takes 9% of Canada's forests to suck up all the CO2. So we're being lied to and we're being robbed on that taxation scene. But in order to push that agenda, you have to have forest fires that grow out of control. We have fewer fires statistically than we used to have, but they burn bigger. And there's a number of reasons why they burn bigger. One of them is some of the chemicals that are being sprayed everywhere, mostly barium and aluminum. And there's a number of other toxic chemicals that get sprayed on us. But the other issue is that beginning around 2012, every province in Canada began to cut back on their forest firefighting budget. They cut staff, they cut equipment, they went through a series, they removed their fire tower systems, they changed their permitting systems. And people need to, I wish I would have heard Nikki's talk earlier. Were you talking about forest fire situation, Nikki? Okay, so she's okay, but she was. So what happens is, in combination with the spraying and weather modification, allowing different areas to dry out, other areas we have too much rain, other areas we don't have enough, that can drive the agenda. And I've looked at a number of forest fire maps from one side of Canada to the other, and you see breakouts and patterns around, for example, out in northern BC and Alberta, that are concentrated all in around oil production. And so then I go back and I look at some of the weather patterns, and they didn't have lightning storms. And so it turns out that a good number of the fires in Canada that are causing these problems are arson. And so because our Minister of Environment has already proven he's willing to break the law to push a climate change agenda, I've looked at a ton of circumstantial evidence without being on the ground doing investigations that lead me to believe a good number of fires across Canada that are being labeled as cause unknown are actually arson fires. And if you look at what happened in Jasper, guys, and I'm going to stop talking after I make this point, there was 50 professional forest firefighters showed up on scene in Jasper with 20 pieces of heavy firefighting equipment, and the federal government categorically would not allow them to fight fires and protect homes along the tree line in Jasper, and they had to stand by and watch trees burn. So the geoengineering has a whole number of things it's doing, but it's only a segment of the overall picture. And because there's hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars at stake with the green agenda, so I've already proven to you statistically that we're a carbon sink. Anything that the government is doing here in Canada to modify our weather is all designed to push that narrative. And even the areas that burnt in Nova Scotia on that fire, we had a girl down there named Shelley Hipson, and she's really she's another warrior like you guys. And Shelley actually was monitoring the amount of air traffic and spraying that was going on for the last number of years. And down here, to be honest with you guys, if you even bring this topic up, in most cases, you're going to be labeled a tinfoil hatter. And it's not commonly talked about down here. And most people don't want to talk about it because they're worried about labels. Well, I'm way past that point now. I've been censored, and I've had a bunch of things happen, and the government hates me, to tell you the truth. So I was mentioning to Bettina that actually I thought I wouldn't be allowed on any of these platforms after what happened with that last spring with that other interview. So I actually wrote a book, and it's called The Redneck Conservative. And in there, I talk about everything we're talking about tonight. And then I offered a political solution. And that book is, it's available on Amazon, but it is 100% politically incorrect. And it did not make me any friends in any government agency across Canada. But it made me a lot of friends that matter. Folks like yourself. Like, I was surprised when, the best way to put it is anytime I get a call like this, sometimes we all think what we're doing doesn't really matter. But when you throw a pebble in a pond, you never know where those waves are going to end up. And it's like having Bettina reach out and say, well, look, would you like to talk about this? And that was something that was done a year ago. And I stayed in touch with Reiner prior to his arrest. And the political solution we had come up with to deal with this down here in Nova Scotia, you guys are in BC. You guys just had your election hijacked on you, by the way, right? I don't know if you guys, what I'm going to tell you, but I was working with some groups out there, and you guys just had your election stolen. And down here in Nova Scotia, we're going through the same thing. We had 20 independent candidates down here that elections Nova Scotia wouldn't allow to get their name on the ballots. and we only have 55 ridings to 1.1 million people. So down here in Nova Scotia, guys, they've cut our fire budgets dramatically. And then overwhelmingly that I want you guys to be aware of too, is that we're suffering from a lack of meritocracy. We're beginning here in the mid-90s. We stopped hiring people based on merit and start hiring people based on the amount of boxes that they ticked. So if you were a minority of any kind or a victim group, when you went in under government policy, now both federal and provincial, they hire people who aren't qualified to do their jobs. And I can tell you in forest fires, nothing beats experience. Even you can have all the training in the world, and if you don't get a chance to use it, you lose it. And so I've watched what's happened in BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, here in Nova Scotia. And when this really started to ramp up, when they started spraying our skies, at the same time when they were talking about climate, or how bad it was going to be, we were all going to burn and the world was coming to an end. They systematically across Canada began cutting our fire budgets.
May I interject for a moment?
Sure,
Please?
go ahead.
I just want to ask a question before we get too far into the reeds of the Black Lagoon here.
Yeah.
I'm from Australia, obviously. Well, I am in Australia still.
Okay.
So pretty familiar with bushfires. I've generally lived always on the edge of national parks, etc. So I just wanted to ask you one question when you're talking about the arson, because our fires of 2019 and 20 were, as you know, pretty severe, and there was a lot of arson going on there, but grey area, nobody really knows. So I just wanted to ask you, when you're talking about arson, do you think that was like a convenient arson? And I'm sure there was more than one arse doing the arsoning, but was it a convenient arson or was it an organised arson, in your opinion?
In my opinion, the one in Nova Scotia, I believe, was idiots, right? But the big fires that started in Quebec 3 weeks before there was a major conference in New York pushing the climate change agenda, and 3 weeks before the government was bringing in another major hike to the carbon tax, I got a call, I think within a couple of hours of 13 fires started almost simultaneously, almost at the exact same time, within minutes of one another in Quebec, in the spring of last year when the fires were going on here in Eastern Canada. And so I went back through the weather data, and I'm a qualified forest fire investigator as well. So I'd be sent in after fire. My job is to do an investigation, determine point of origin and cause of fire. And so immediately what we always do as an investigator, you have to go back and check out all the weather data and the forest fire weather indexes. What did the indexes say? What was the climate? How dry were the conditions? Were there lightning strikes in the area? Well, the fires in Quebec, I think there was 12 or 13, and they were spaced as far as 1,000 kilometers apart from one side to the other. And they lit up within minutes of one another. So when I looked at that, I called a few of my other investigator friends, guys that used to do the same thing. And I said, I want you to take a look at something, and I'm not telling you anything. You just take a look at it and tell me what you think without being on the ground. And I also sent it to some friends of mine connected with the military. And the military contacts come back and said that looked like a strategic military operation, well-timed, because the military has the ability to light forest fires basically anywhere, and it's actually a military tactic. And it looked like it was a well-coordinated event. The wind was blowing from Quebec down into New York. You got to remember, New York was suffering from, heavy fire smoke for a week. And all the people pushing the climate agenda were in New York at the time for a big major international conference. And conveniently, 13 forest fires start when on a dry day, when there's no rain and there hasn't been any lightning in the previous 24 hours, and they start within minutes of one another. So as an investigator, all I ever look at is evidence. And the preponderance of evidence points directly to the fact that what happened in Quebec was a well-coordinated military-level operation to start an arson to push an agenda. But because I wasn't on the ground, I can't confirm that.
Yes, I think similar things happened here in 2019. Yes. Sounds familiar.
And I think they're still happening in BC, and I still think they're happening in Alberta. Because you got to remember, guys, that down in Nova Scotia, the initial agency to come in and do our largest fire investigation was the RCMP. And the RCMP takes their orders from the federal government, who are pushing a climate agenda. They come back and said, cause of fire indeterminate. So Department of Natural Resources within days, laid multiple charges for arson. And so the climate change agenda that the Prime Minister was pushing, or the statements, that kind of went out the window, and said, no, this right off the bat. And when I looked at the aerial photography of those fires, immediately I said, this is, it was along a trail. It looked like somebody went along with an ATV or a vehicle lighting fires. I said, that all indications is an arson fire. But in Nova Scotia, same as in Alberta, we had cut what's called our Helitack program, where if you have no experience with forest fires, the quicker that you can be on scene with as much equipment as possible determines whether you're going to have a 5-acre fire or a 50,000-acre fire. And every province in Canada has reduced their capacity to respond rapidly to forest fires. Every province. And it started back around 2010, right around the time the government was saying, we have to do something about climate change. Well, if climate change is the issue, instead of cutting back, they should have been ramping up. So I'm just looking at evidence. And what does the evidence suggest? I'm looking at the amount of fires across Canada now that are being categorized as unknown origin. Well, I can tell you as a fire investigator, the odds of unknown origin are slim. You can always figure out basically how a fire started and point of origin. And routinely now you'll hear back cause of, source of ignition unknown. Well, that's just straight up government. As I said earlier, we lie every day. That's government lying to you. So it's a combination of things: is reduction in budgets, reduction in qualified people making decisions, same as what happened in Jasper. Basically, if you put an idiot in control, if you put a monkey in control, things turn into a circus pretty quick. And that's what happens. So you have unqualified people put in extreme situations where, if you're not highly trained and experienced and level-headed with a long track record of dealing with those situations, you're courting catastrophe. And so on top of all that, the amount of spraying that's taking place, and down here, we're not dealing with some of the big insect infestations that they are in areas, for example, around Jasper and other areas that you guys have out in BC on a regular basis. But we have no reason for them to be spraying our skies with anything other than to spray us like bugs, right? So I said, well, okay, I'm an investigator. What are they spraying? So I started to do a bunch of research, and I started looking at the amount of patents in regards to this, and that this stuff's been going on for like 30, 40, over 40 years now. And everybody has to sign an NDA who's involved. People can be sued and be bankrupted. And so there's a whole series of things, guys. So go ahead. Somebody else ask another question other than that, guys.
Yeah, Sherry, unmute yourself.
Yeah, thanks. Pete, I've been sort of monitoring when the forestry practices of both monoculture creating and spraying herbicides, whether they're killing gypsy moths or whatever, but they have this secret formula that I've investigated and found all kinds of poisons in that. And they're not actually seemingly giving people the adequate 48 hours or 24 even hours notice that they're spraying in certain areas. You're supposed to monitor it, I guess, and know yourself if you monitor the Ministry of Forest websites to know if you're getting sprayed or not. But I'm just curious from your perspective about holding some accountability to the Ministry of Forest for how they're managing things that might create an intensity and increase the possibility of fires through this kind of work.
Well, here's what happens, guys. You still have to remember, irregardless of what the initial intention is across all levels of government, federal and provincial, right now, you have people in management. And this started back in the 90s, where people stopped being hired based on meritocracy. And when people, I'll give you an example. If you have the guy who was the very bottom of the class as a doctor with 400 patients, what do you call the guy at the bottom of the class? Doctor, right? So if that person puts their hand up and they declare to be some victim group, and under current government hiring policy, they get hired, for whatever reason, they tend to gravitate to upper levels of management at an unexplainable rate. And so it's a combination of, I think it's a combination of stupidity. It's a combination, and stupid people are easier to manipulate. So for example, if I have an ulterior motive of doing something to drive a bigger agenda, I will tell you, this is the story that why we're doing it. And I'll appeal to a motive that maybe you'll go along with because you're not a critical thinker and you're not bright enough to ask questions. And you can convince government people inside of government things to do all kinds of things. And actually, when you talk to them, they'll actually, in many cases, think they're doing a great thing. The
Well,
problem is you
sorry.
can't hold people accountable. Well, inside government now, there's no way to hold people accountable.
That's my point. This is the point. I think that I think we all here in this group, anyways, people that I know, are all very aware of the agenda and how big it is and how it's being played out. And this is like, how do we find those doorways in to hold accountability, to find a stopping point? Like, even if the legal system is brainwashed and bought out, how do we as human beings on this country deal with this? Do you have any ideas? Do you have any direction?
Lawsuits.
That's, well, to who? This is the thing. You're telling it we're corrupt at the core level.
That's right. So what you have to do is you have to be able to try to put together lawsuits that name individuals. Because what'll happen is, if you're working under, see, most people don't even understand this. Back in, I think it's around 1990, there was a law case in Nova Scotia, well, not Nova Scotia, but out west, I think it was in Alberta. And it was called the Little Child case. And the Little Child law case set precedent all across Canada inside politics. Politicians were making promises and not keeping them. And a group of people got together and tried to sue their politician, a member of the government, for not doing what they were supposed to do. And the courts at that time passed a decision that hasn't been challenged since and is still in effect, that said a politician is allowed to lie to anybody for any reason, and they're only held accountable every 4 years, and they, as a politician, can't be held accountable for lying. But they can be held accountable. So what people are trying to do is, when you know something is being done, there's something called notice of liabilities.
Yeah.
And you can outline, here's my issue. And then what happens is the politician or the government agent, whatever level they're at, can't say, well, we didn't know. So what you can do is, the problems that your folks have, and let's say, for example, it's spray, and you don't, the reason why they don't give you notice to spray, they don't want to give you enough time to get organized to protest. There's a reason. I mean, it's straight up simple. It's what they call Occam's razor. It's the simplest solution is often, or the simplest, what it looks like explanation is often the easiest explanation. If we give you 48 hours to tell you you're going to spray, you've got 48 hours to band together and put a bunch of people in there that then they can't spray. So it's a lot easier to do stuff and just say, look, we thought the notice went out, or, me bad, forgive us, please. But that's just a constant way of how the government gets away with things. And when industry is involved, I've worked inside, before I worked in the government, I spent 3 years inside management in the forestry industry as a supervisor, planting operations and chainsaw operations. And when those pulp companies would spray, they were supposed to stop at all river locations. And the guys in charge just said, man, we're paying you guys X amount. You go over there. They'd spray into the headwaters, the salmon streams. Nobody cared. And nobody was being sued, and nobody was being held accountable. So the courts is one way to try to do it. But you have to realize too, guys, is that the courts in Canada now are corrupted as well. I mean,
it's not just Canada.
Well, yeah, it's all over the world. As a matter of fact, that talk I was on with Jim Ferguson tonight, we had people from I think the White Rabbit, I think her name is, down in Australia, a couple other people in Australia, Denmark, Germany, and every country that we talk to, it's the exact same thing happening. How do you hold politicians or government agencies responsible? So the only way you actually be able to have to do it, you have to proceed what you want to do with notice of liability, so people can't say we weren't aware. It's much like what's happening now with vaccinations. People just said, look, we followed order. Well, that didn't hold up too well in Nuremberg trials after World War II. And so if you notify, for example, the deputy minister and the minister of your Department of Forestry in a joint letter to them, that here's our concerns, and you have to track everything that you do, because if eventually you end up in court, then you're against lawyers that the tax money they take from you will be used to fight you against you in court for the issues that you're trying to push. Right? So I don't mean to be the bearer of bad news here, but you're fighting a major uphill battle because the police have been corrupted. The RCMP no longer will do their jobs, straight up. Nice to work with some of them guys. There were some good guys, but now at all upper levels, everybody had to be woke to get promoted. Everybody in the upper levels of all police agencies across Canada now are woke, and everything that gets woke turns to you know what. And so your policing agencies, even if you bring up issues to them, they're unwilling to risk being promoted and going after sensitive issues. If it's a federal related matter, the RCMP categorically will not do investigations and do their jobs. And if you get into the courts, I just got an email from Brian Peckford, who's living out on your coast now, last week, who basically has come to the sorry realization that even the charter no longer has the that we all thought it had. I mean, he's challenging everything, and everything is being turned over by corrupted judges that were put in place to stack the courts with a woke liberal mindset. And I don't mean to be too hard on the liberals here in the crowd, but man, you got to give your head a shake, folks. I mean, people, you have to learn how to do research, right? And so research and that computer and keyboard becomes your best friend. But there's what you want from where you guys are in BC. Try to find yourself a couple of lawyers that have families that live in areas that are being affected, and they'll take it on as a personal challenge, because very few people, and they won't do it if they're a big firm. Here in Nova Scotia, we try to get big firms to do all kinds of things, and we learned the hard way that all the big firms are on retainer by the government. They just hire them on retainer so that they won't go after the government for major issues. Sometimes you may have to find someone like, in regards to vaccines, like a Bobby Kennedy, right? Who's going after big pharma like never before. In the forest industries, you're up against a major juggernaut out there who's going to do what they want to do, who behind the scenes in your last election probably put a bunch of money into different campaigns and people, and what they do is they put strategic people in power. So one of the other best ways, and I know that I'm beating an old drum here, is unfortunately, you're going to have to get involved in politics or find people willing to do that. Because if you don't have a deputy minister or a minister of your forestry out there, if you don't get the person elected, do you want to make these changes? Once you're elected, because I was in the political system, irregardless of how well-meaning you are, you're told to sit down, shut up, do what you're told, or we're going to throw you out of the party. It's that simple.
May I ask another question, please?
Sure, go ahead.
Do you guys over there have like the parliamentary immunity? Sorry if that's already been addressed. Is that because that's a thing here? So no one's able to be held accountable. It's just, I mean, what is a government? It's a body of a bunch of people, and you hold one person accountable, they just become a scapegoat, or I like to refer to them as a Judas goat. You know, they get locked away or whatever, or you know, they probably just get sent down to the bunker to the cocktail bar, but whatever. So there's really no comeback in that sense. And I do absolutely agree. The courts are owned too. It's quite rare to find a judge that's still there for the people. And if they are, you've got to wonder, are they just, you know, a hero? They've put underpants on the outside for a moment just to get us all in.
And that's
trust
exactly
me, Ben,
what
you know.
So in the last chapter in that book that I wrote, we come up with a solution, and we worked this solution out with Brian Peckford. And you guys just missed an opportunity, because right now in BC, you guys have what, 46, I think 46 NDP and 45 Conservatives and 2 Green. Is that still the case?
I believe it's 47 NDP and 44 Conservatives, I believe.
Okay, so now, even with the Green Party, they've only got 2, the NDP now, because they messed with the election, started finding extra votes. The NDP are now still in power. They still have enough, they can rule as a majority. So we come up with a scheme to run enough independent MLAs, candidates, that if you had enough of them, they would be able to control Parliament, and they can't be controlled by a party, and they can't be controlled by groups behind the scene. I'll give you an example. Down in Nova Scotia, our premier's a Mason, you know, that secret handshake community. So our premier's a Mason. The judges, we have 5,500 Masons in a province of 1.1 million people, and they are across all levels inside government. And none of them in those agencies will stand up against the premier because he's a brother Mason. The fires we had in Nova Scotia, I could tell you categorically, the person inside government who's responsible for putting out forest fires had never been on a fire in his life. He sat in on a hiring committee where 3 of the 4 people were Masons. He was a Mason, and they hired a brother Mason to make him a supervisor. Then they graduated into manager, then director and senior director, where now he runs the entire forest firefighting operation in Nova Scotia, and he's not qualified to run a campfire. So now I'm just telling you straight up the way it is. So people say to me all the time, you know, I'm a fanatic. I hosted and produced a hunt fish TV series, the first father-daughter thing of its kind in North America, actually. And that's really what I want to be doing. What I'm doing now, I don't want to do any of it. I'd much rather do 100 other things, but I'm a grandfather of 6, and I'm determined to not leave this mess to my grandchildren. And I will die if I have to fighting for this. So I don't care anymore, right? So I'll say what needs to be said, and I don't care who I have to go up against. So we tried to make those changes in politics, and down here in Nova Scotia, we had a set election date by legislation. And a month ago, the premier broke the law, called an election, and then made sure elections in Nova Scotia, we had 20 independents going to run on the ballot, and none of them could get through because they changed the legislation. And if we'd even got a half a dozen of them in, we could have gave control of the government back to the people. And then people like myself would have input on common sense, saying there's a series of things right off the bat. There categorically will not be any geoengineering of the weather in the province of Nova Scotia. So our current premier is put in place by both BlackRock and Vanguard. Back in 2008, he was involved in the Bahamas in something called the Paradise Papers, where his specialty was hiding money for wealthy companies all over the world. And when he came up here, our province right now is currently controlled not by local people, but by international corporations who want to control the largest port on Canada's eastern coast. And everything else is peripheral. It's why we had that $200 million fire and nobody did anything about it. And not one person, by the way, not one person got fired. A couple people got promoted, and the government just went out and created a new 350-member volunteer group without consulting the existing volunteer groups to fight fires. And what I just told you is, if you're not highly experienced and with a lot of training, even with all the training, without the experience, you forget it all in short time. Right. So what we need warriors like all of you people that I'm sitting looking in front of me here, actually somehow has to find a way to get involved. We're working with people down here that have gone in and trained themselves to learn how to initiate lawsuits. Then we've got a series of people that are willing to run as independent candidates to take control back of government. And then down here, for example, guys, in our last election, the Masons are the foot soldiers. You're right. I'm seeing that down here. And so, and you don't know who they are. So go online. Does anybody on here, do you know how to identify the secret handshakes, how they stand, how they hold, how they position their feet when they're standing on a stage? Those are little things that people should go and learn, and you go, whoa, okay. So I've been trying to get this guy to help us on this forest fire issue, and he's a Mason. and the deputy minister is a Mason, and nothing's going to happen. So you talk your head off. You can do it anything you want. So what we're trying to teach people to try to do is figure out where's the head of the snake, and stop nipping at ankles and try to cut off the head of the snake. And one of the ways to do that is to try to identify people as personally liable after you send them notices of liability, and find yourself a lawyer who's not corrupted, and that's not easy to do, or jam sideways in the government trough. In Nova Scotia, we're small enough that all the big firms, like I say, they're on retainer and they won't go after the government. And any smaller firm, they want to be sideways in the government trough too. And if you don't play ball down the road, you're never getting government contracts. And it doesn't matter if you favor one party or another. All they know is that you're not going to play ball. So I mean, for us to try to find lawyers to get involved in things, sometimes we got to go to Ontario, somebody from another province, because that's the way things work. And so even all the spraying campaigns, that has to come from, for example, that would have to be, you're going to need a whistleblower on the inside who's willing to stick their neck out, right, and start leaking information. And so once you start doing your geoengineering, okay, where are they flying from? Any idea what companies are doing the spraying? Dates, times, some of that stuff you can track. But what you want to do is find people involved in your movement who might know somebody in those companies that are willing to leak information. Because leaked data is one of the greatest weapons you can have, leaked government data. And we have some people down here that help us out. And the other thing to do, guys, is to become highly proficient at freedom of information requests. We call them FOIPOPs down here. They cost us $5 a piece. But we've got a team of people down here now that have become experts at, when you're trying to find accountability, you can't hold anybody accountability inside government unless you know what they're doing. And they lie, like I said, they lie. But if they get caught lying, once you may file a freedom of information request, they can be fired for that. And that you can push. So you can't go after them for, outright lying to you, but you can go after them for requesting specific data through freedom of information requests. And then if they fail to give you what you've asked for, then you can go to your, down here in Nova Scotia, we have a person that's a commissioner for, make sure that when you ask for freedom of information, you get it. And so what happens is, even when we had vaccine down here, we had a couple of people that filed over 200 FOIPOPs apiece, and we just buried the province. So down the road with court cases, you just find all this data. And then the other thing that you want to do is you want to get excellent at doing FOIPOPs, and then you want to find some friendly people inside mainstream media, which is almost impossible to do. So find friendly people inside podcasts. There's a lot of them popping up, right? There's a lot of them in Alberta where there's a big freedom movement there. And what you want to do is get yourself, once you put together some FOIPOPs that bury the government, if mainstream media won't cover it, go to private, even the Rebel. I mean, you can go to, if it's a good enough story and you got good enough data, we've got a ton of people that would love to bury the government on stuff that they're doing. So you want to become good at FOIPOPs. You want to find yourself a lawyer that's sympathetic to your cause. You want to find some whistleblowers inside government, because other than that, I can tell you that the government specializes in giving people the runaround and lying to them. I don't mean to, wreck your guys' day, but
You don't, because that's very obvious. We have a question for you. Jerry, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Peter. Great.
Hi.
We've got a lot of information, very valuable information. There's a group of us in Alberta here that we're working with the geoengineering and trying to we're doing investigations, stuff like that, trying to get the information we need. And Danielle Smith at her town halls this summer, just about every town hall she had, she was asked about geoengineering, and she come back with two answers: that it's all the fuel that we get is coming from the U.S. and it's federal.
Yeah.
It's federal, and U.S. military is basically the ones that are looking at take care of all the weather modification stuff like that. That's all she knew, but I think she knows a lot more than probably what she's saying. But there's I think a glimmer of hope maybe because like with Robert F. Kennedy now, they got that Kennedy Maha nomination program, and I see that Jim Lee and Dan Wigginton and there's 2 or 3 more on there that are very into geoengineering and weather modifications that are very knowledgeable, and they've been nominated on that board, and they're and I don't know how long them nominations are going for. Like a bunch of us are voting from here, so and excuse me, so Robert F. Kennedy had an interview with Jim Lee not too long ago there, so he knows about what's going on. So I think it might be promising if you get that bunch in there working on the environment with him. I'm not sure, but hopefully it might be a step in the right direction.
So I got to agree with what Jerry's saying, and I'm looking at what Jeff is posting down here too, that he has that he monitors a lot of this. So here's what happens, guys. If you look across the province, your best ally with what you're dealing with in BC is Danielle Smith right now, right? Because she has a team behind, and I'm not pushing any party. I believe the party system's broken beyond repair. Our motto, I'm the president of the Independent Nova Scotia Initiative down here, and our motto is the party's over. So our plan is always, and it's going to continue to be, to elect enough independents who sign a performance contract where if they lie, cheat, steal, try to cross the floor, or don't do the things they promise to do, for the first time in Canadian politics, you're going to be able to fire them for non-performance. And the parties won't allow any of their members sign such a contract, but an independent that you work with, you can start with now prior to your next election. Find yourself a good candidate, get them ginned up on everything you're doing, and then put a big push behind them and get enough of them to take your province back. Because right now, you guys, it's a shame that you guys didn't get organized with the independent movement here till about 8 months ago, and you needed about 2 or 3 years to get organized. So if you can find somebody behind the scenes in the conservative movement in Alberta, because they're the ones who are really telling Danielle Smith what needs to be done. And I can tell you from I've watched some of the things she's done here recently, is if someone gives her the evidence that geoengineering out there is problematic and costing Alberta lives, health issues, time and money, that she will take action on it. But with your current NDP government, you guys are toast. I'm just telling you, right? The only thing you can hope is a couple of those people kick off because they got 4 or 5 jabs, and then you have a by-election. And if there's a by-election, you need to galvanize across the province to make sure that a couple of independents win those seats in a by-election, because it's those guys who can hold the government accountable, especially if they have a performance contract in place. I have extreme hope after what's happened down in the US, especially with the people from the geoengineering platform. I think, did you say Wigginton is his name? I've seen some of his stuff. And some of these people, these guys are warriors. They're not going to back down. So, and even if you disagree with what's happening in Alberta, or having a party do it, even if the party can't come out and say that we can do it, there may be people behind the scenes. But problem in party politics is if you can't get the upper management to go along with something, irregardless of the good intentions of anybody involved in any party, they get thrown under the bus. It's that simple.
Yeah,
So,
Yeah.
I was just going to say that she just had her AGM and she got a vote in of her membership of 91%. So she knows that there's a lot of people behind her. So what our next strategy is to give her the information and let her if we can convince her, and there's a bunch of groups working with her, a lot of freedom groups, different organizations working with her. And so give her the information and get her to put the pressure. Maybe she's going down. She stated she's going down to the inauguration, Trump's inauguration. She's been down there several times. She just signed an agreement with 14 U.S. states on oil energy efficiency and making that route. So she's definitely zoned in. She's turned the direction from the Eastern Canada, which there's actually absolutely no help or results there at all, with both the idiots there, pardon my language, but so she's focused her energy down, and it looks like into the States, into that area. So
one of the things that you can do too, guys, is even not at her level. You just have to find, and we really found this down here in Nova Scotia when COVID was going on, when we were told, no, we've got 90% support for what we're doing. And it was all BS, right? It's just straight up lies. Once again, government lying. But we found out that all of these small groups, even the group that you guys are right now, I'm willing to bet that there's probably another 15 smaller groups, Facebook groups and stuff that think like you guys do and are interested in the same issue, and you guys haven't found them yet. And so what COVID taught us was to dig around and find like-minded people. And I'm willing to bet there's a whole lot more people in BC that are as interested in this topic as you folks are, and you might not have found them yet.
no, I agree with you there. Yep.
I think we found quite a few people actually. So here, my organization, Geoengineering Free Canada, we are heavy on Substack. So we have quite a big Substack. There is Nikki Florio. She's very well connected in the United States, and we are actually really heavily connected with Jim Lee, especially. And so we do have quite a big audience already. The problem I see at the moment here in Canada, and maybe also worldwide, is that there is hardly any activism.
Yeah,
People,
and go ahead. No, go ahead.
Yeah, I think, and especially here in the Okanagan. So I'm located in Kelowna, Okanagan, and also in the West Kootenays. So people, especially in the summertime, it's all about, okay, let's go down to the beach. Let's go do our summer. The Canadian summer is very short, so let's enjoy the summertime. Let's enjoy the sunshine, and it's very hot and dry, and people really enjoy life. They don't see the enemy anymore. We have such a huge fish to fry, but they don't see it. It's not a visible like what we experience with the COVID crap. When people were actually forced to to put their muzzles on and all that kind of stuff, which I never did. And so anyway, what I'm trying to say is it is gone. And I just recently gone. It's certainly not gone, but for them it is. It's not in their faces. And I just recently had a conversation with a friend of mine here too. And he said, what do you think? Why do you think this is going on? We are free. We can travel. We can do this. We can do that. And I'm like, I don't think so. We are not free at all. So it's not in people's heads anymore. It's not in their minds. It's not visible for them. They don't realize that the banking system is collapsing, that the digital currency is coming up. They are not even close to, okay, they do know that Bill C-36 here in BC is happening. It is there. But they don't realize that people can't go back to work because they are forced to take the jabs. All that kind of stuff is not, and it's not in front of them. They don't realize that this is really going on and really happening. So activism, in my opinion, has really slowed down significantly. I started the Worldwide Rally and back in 2021. It was a huge event. We were the leading country in the Worldwide Rally. We featured 36 locations and massive amount of people. We kickstarted the convoy on the 22nd of January of 2022. They rolled out on the 23rd of January here from BC down to Ottawa. This is how massive this was. We had a giant crowd of people in Kelowna for a city like that. It was really, really big. So we had a really good movement. We had a movement. Now, in my opinion, the movement got stuck. It's not moving anymore.
So here's what happens, guys. It's information warfare, right? It's like Bill C-63. That gets passed. Half of the independent broadcasters in Canada will be shut down. My book will be banned. Probably stuff I wrote in it. I wouldn't be surprised to see Mountie show up at my door and want to haul me away, right? So I just watched a speech that Donald Trump gave here about 7 days ago, and he talked about destroying the censorship industrial complex, which is now running rampant here in Canada. So even when you're trying to get your message out, the federal government, they've got enough people inside CSIS down here. Like even when I was in Ottawa, I spent the first 5 days of the truckers thing in Ottawa. I went up to it. And that was like, that was kind of like, I don't know if any of you guys went, but that was kind of like being at Woodstock in the winter. That was the biggest party, I think. And I did a lot of partying, right? And man, it was just wild. It was the most patriotic thing in Canadian history. But the information warfare that we're experiencing spun a completely different story. And it's about to get worse. If C-63 goes through, it's about to get worse. Now, the upside is, as Trump said in the US, they're doing everything humanly possible to destroy that censorship complex. And so what's happening even tonight, because like I say, this is my second meeting now tonight, talking to freedom fighters from around the world, right? And so, and every conversation is a pebble in a pond, and I don't know where it's going to end up. So everybody right now is trying to find ways to work around mainstream media without being censored. Like even if you take this talk tonight, you can't put it on Facebook anywhere. These stuff I've said is going to get you, you're getting a strike. You can't, and you probably can't post it on YouTube, right? You'll have to, maybe you have to put it on Rumble or something along those lines. But hopefully what I've talked to a couple people down in the US already that are thinking that C-63 has been brought to the attention of Donald Trump already. And he'll just go to Justin Trudeau and say, if that happens, you're getting hit with a few more tariffs. Here's the way it's going to be. You won't be censoring US commerce or US what people want to do. And Trudeau's going to be in a position where he has to capitulate. It's not going to be a negotiation. It's going to be, here's what's going to happen. So I actually have some hope along that way. So what'll happen, guys, is every single thing. I don't know who here knows what the Tavistock Institute is, but they were started back in wartime, back prior to World War II. And their number one job is to figure out how do you psychologically control mass numbers of people? How do you get people to give up? How do you get people to do things they normally wouldn't do? Like I know some good warriors that have been beaten down over the last few years, and they just thrown their hands in the air and they said, there's no point. But that's being strategically implemented. It's kind of like when the Coots Four were arrested and tried to make an example out of them, right? For, when they were in Alberta there protesting at the border. So what happens is it goes back to this in the information war is you have to be strategic about what you do. You have to, a lot of things now you can go on Rumble, and everybody on this platform has to get themselves a good following on X, because you can get away with murder down. There's a lot of things you can say on X right now that last year you were taken down, you were gone. So you have to develop a good following on X. You have to get your message out, and everybody on here needs to shoot for a target, at least 5,000 followers, and then try to build it from there. So for example, I looked at yesterday, MSNBC in the US had 28,000 followers on a program. That's crazy. Joe Rogan has 18 million. Tucker Carlson will do those kind of numbers. We have people here in Canada like Jordan B. Peterson, some of these big. This is strategically what you want to do is on your message, try to get yourself in front of some of the largest podcasters in Canada, right? Because everybody's concerned about things they're made aware of. But if they're not aware of it, it's much like you said, it's not in their face. But, how many people do you know that get their information from CBC? I turned down a CBC interview yesterday because they can't be trusted not to, they're just psychopathic liars. So what happens is those key points is this, okay? So learn to do FOI pops, get good at it. Find yourself lawyers that are sympathetic to your cause that actually might have kids or in an area that's being sprayed, and now they got skin in the game. And then find yourself some people inside the freedom community that can hook you up with people with big followings. And here's what happens. They always need new content, and they always need controversial content to get the clicks they want. And everything you guys are doing, the way to build strength is you have to have numbers. And you have to have numbers. And if you've got enough numbers that you can prevent freedom of information and whistleblower data to, people will get upset. And people will do stuff based on emotion way sooner than they will over logic. We all base our most decisions on emotion, then try to back them up with logic. Well, there's a whole bunch of strategic things that you can use to get your message out to mass numbers and make it effectual. Because it's much like you said back then, you know, people were going like, this is insane. I'm going to lose my job if I don't take an experimental jab. Well, now they're kind of going, well, it's backed off. It hasn't backed off at all. They're just regrouping, figuring how we're going to do it better the next time. And you got the NDP in back out there, and you guys are up the creek again because they put in legislation. You got, to be honest with you, I mean, they're batshit crazy, like straight up. I'll just say that, right? So the only way to overcome that is you have to win the information war on this. I mean, the amount of spraying that's going on, it's 10 years ago, people would say you're a tinfoil hatter and you're crazy, but the overwhelming preponderance of evidence that's no longer just circumstantial, that's in your face, all you got to do is look up. Anybody on a phone most days in Canada can film what's happening in the skies around them. And I think, what did George Orwell say? He said, you know, their final thing, I mean, they want you to not believe what your eyes are seeing. And because they don't understand the long-term effects on their kids. So one of the other big groups, guys, is not environmental groups. It's moms with little kids that are going to we're going to end up with problems from the stuff that's being sprayed on the air of them. So with your information war, you have to spread out and go after everybody that you can conceivably think, who's being affected by this? Well, they are, but how? How's it affecting my kids? You got a problem with the kid? You got a health problem with the kid? And if there's a way that you can find backup information that can link those health problems to what's being sprayed in the sky, all of a sudden you've got another whole group who wants to help out.
Right. Peter, we've got another question too, actually. So Zoom user, I know who you are. Just go right ahead, Martin.
Who do we have?
We
Good
have
evening, everybody. Hey, Peter.
Martin, how are you?
Not bad, my friend. Not bad. Good seeing you. Bettina, thank you for the invite. Troy, I see here. Great. And good discussion. Look, when we talk about bills, I think the most damaging bill, which is right now at the Senate, is 293. 293 includes everything. 293 destroys us. It's not just the health treaty. They postponed the health treaty again until May 2025, but it doesn't even matter anymore because countries like here in Canada, where we have Bill 293 now by the Senate, it becomes irrelevant whether they signed the treaty or not. They follow these already. The other issue we have in Nova Scotia, not many people talk about, we got a fundamental problem. When we look at the GDP in Nova Scotia, back in 2022, the GDP was 66% government. So 66% is depending somehow on the government. That's not a functional economy anymore. That's a socialism, and of course we all know that goes towards then the Marxism agenda. I would say today that number is more likely 70-75% when we look how the bureaucracy increased in our communities, the infiltrations we have from the external corporations like Peter mentioned this evening. Sorry, I joined late. I had bad reception. And I think the focal point in really getting the public involved is the migration, the lies of the vaccination. That's where people are starting to wake up big time, but especially the migration. People are fed up everywhere in regards to that. So we have to capture that momentum. And what happened in the States with the election, that's where we have to build on. There will be a lot of pressure from the States to this government. It doesn't matter who is going to be in power. There will be a lot of pressure. And we have to start to build that momentum and make the relations in order for create the leverage needed. So I think we are on a good path. It's unfortunate what Houston done with this election. With this, that's a scam. The way all around, I agree with Peter, and I agree with Peter what he says. Okay, and yeah, we just have to find each other. We have to find each other and work together. It's so important right now, and that's in the Nova Scotia level, but on the federal level too. I mean, Alberta, Troy, I think you know, we had the picture circulated where we had the facility in Alberta where it says on the goddamn door, Weather Modification Center, right on the door. I have this picture somewhere. So yes, we have to address these issues, and so glad we have a meeting like this and get informed and can exchange information. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Martin. Anybody else? Okay.
Sorry.
Oh,
I
go
just
ahead.
wanted, I've got a little bit of an internal conflict I need you to help me with here, Peter.
Yeah.
You're saying that you said earlier in this meeting that the good people sort of, if I didn't misunderstand you, the good people, that are in politics are basically told to sit down and behave, and otherwise you're not going to be part of the party, like get on board or get out, basically. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. So I just can't quite understand why it's valuable then to get yourself involved in politics and become like an independent, etc. If it's kind of all like predetermined, really. Is
So
this
here,
a matter of being seen to be doing something? Is this a matter of just, oh, we'll give it a go anyway, or just try, because if you don't try, then nothing will happen. And I get that, but I just wonder, starting lawsuits, which are, as you would know, extremely expensive,
correct.
and very easy to kick the can and cost you basically just run you dry of funds. So I'm just trying to see the hope in getting involved from that level, as opposed to maybe, I don't know, some other mystical tactic. But I'm just wondering about that tactic itself. Isn't it sort of self-canceling?
No, so here's what happens, Stella. We get those points brought up everywhere we go, right? So the independent Nova Scotia movement, we're just a teaching society. We're not a party. We don't do anything. So we went from one end of the province to another, teaching communities the advantages of having the community pick someone to run for them in politics as an independent, who couldn't be controlled by a party, who can't be told to sit down and shut up. But Brian Peckford was very specific with us and said, Peter, if you do decide to get involved with politics with independents, because they're independent by nature, you have to do a performance contract with them where you can tie their hands, where they make promises, and you tell them, here's what we want you to do, and they agree to do it. You have to tie their hands with the contract that if they don't do it, they can be fired. And the problem with politics, regardless of where they are in Canada, is they can tell you whatever they need to tell you to get elected, and then they can do whatever they want to do for 4 years legally. They legally can lie to you, and there's nothing you can do. And Canadian courts had said you can fire them 4 years down the road. So it was Brian.
Same here. It's the same sort
Yeah.
of system here. I mean, we're very similar here in Australia because we're under the Crown. It's not just like you guys are.
That's right. And so if let's say you have an overwhelming landslide majority, a couple of independents aren't going to do anything. But I can tell you what just happened in your province. 4 independents would have gave you control of your province back, because right now those 4 independents would be able to hold the government to account. They can table legislation without party approval. They don't have to be politically correct. They can address any issue from SOGI in schools to spraying of your atmosphere. All those things that someone inside the party say it's not a big enough issue. We have bigger fish to fry, or we have major donors, or someone else at another level in government that we can't talk about this. Well, you can't shut up an independent. And so,
okay.
So to work with independents, it has to be strategic. It won't work everywhere. Here in Nova Scotia, it would have worked because we only had 55 seats and 1.1 million people. And we had 45% who didn't turn up to vote in the last election. So we only needed 4 or 5 if in a close election to be able to take control of the government. And so what they can do is they can get in government and say, we want this done. And if the government doesn't want to go along with you, they can withdraw their support, vote a non-confidence, crash the government. So I've learned through years being involved with government, once they're in power, they will virtually jump through hoops of fire to stay in power. And you can get legislation passed that you could never get passed under any other circumstance. And so you can put legislation in for meaningful recall, for example, like, and then that gives people an actual ability to fire people. I know out in BC, you guys had recall, but it wasn't meaningful. To have meaningful recall, the only people who can be involved in firing a politician have to be the people who turned up to vote. So if you hire them, you can fire them. And the side effect of that will be you'll have a huge voter turnout that you didn't have because people have just quit voting. In this election in Nova Scotia, and Martin will be able to confirm this, we're probably going to have the lowest voter turnout in our province's history. We're down 15,000 votes from where we were, and we're still 2 weeks, 10 days, 2 weeks out from an election. In our last election, and 45%, and we're going to have less than 50% voter turnout. And all Tim Houston needs is 25%. So we're going to have 1 out of 4 people making a decision what happens in this province. And I know his plans are to bring in digital ID. We'll talk about it. But we just had an election in New Brunswick where the new, they went into an election neck and neck. They weren't running independents. And all of a sudden, the sitting Conservative government gets hammered. And the new premier right off the bat says, one of my first goals is bringing in digital ID. So my very first thoughts are, okay, this election got corrupted, same as what just happened to you guys in BC. I mean, took what, you guys, 8 days later to find enough votes to put the NDP ahead? I mean, how'd that happen? Like the red flags are everywhere. So what agenda is geared up right now that the NDP are going to bring in out there that you guys are going to be hammered on? Look what's happening in your school systems. And now, you can go to a hospital outside BC and get heroin out of a vending machine. That's insane. How did people vote that? I don't think they did. I think there was corruption inside your election system. But because the police won't do their job, you're stuck. So when Stella was talking about the cost of litigation, and what happens is they use your own tax money against you. So what you always have to try to do is find yourself a lawyer who's on a mission. They're not doing it for themselves. They've had a kid that was injured, maybe something like this. And then they do kind of what Bobby Kennedy did. And you don't need to find, people say, well, it's hard to find them. You don't need to find one. You're not looking for 20. You're looking for one who you can rely on, who will go out, who's had an injured family member or something, and will take this on personally and do most of the work pro bono. Now, you may have to cover some expenses, but there's enough people. If your message is big enough and you're talking to enough groups, you can raise money through GoFundMe's to offset some of those costs. But the key to winning those cases is we go back to FOI pops and whistleblowers to try to get things done. So you have to look at everything that needs to be done through the eyes of a military operation. And if it looks like you have a government that's going to win in a massive landslide, then having 3 or 4 independents isn't going to matter. But you guys were walking in out there that was looking like a virtual tie, and I could tell you 4 or 5 independents would have given you back your province. And the same thing in New Brunswick. And Tim Houston down here, when he won his majority, I think he had won by 7 seats, but he only won those seats by 300 to 400 votes. So it wouldn't take much to unseat him. And even if we put him back into a position of minority government without enough independents, like those independents all got blocked. We have a court challenge going in. The paperwork's supposed to come in tomorrow. We have a Section 3 charter violation. We've got election result violations. And we found some people who are doing 90% of the work that a lawyer would have to do that cuts our cost down to 10% of what they should be. And then when you give a lawyer everybody sitting here can do research. It's free, right? The greatest research tool in history is a keypad in front of you right now, and you can start digging stuff up before it gets scrubbed. So everybody has to become a keyboard warrior, and then everybody has to get good at getting their message out and finding other groups and building communities, and then showing people why it matters. And the best way to do that is always with an emotional issue. And the emotional issue with that stuff that's being sprayed in the skies. My best hunting and fishing buddy has Alzheimer's now, and he went downhill in less than a year. This summer he jumped off his wharf and almost drowned because he forgot how to swim. Right? And I don't know if it's from all this spraying that gave it to him, but the man lived an incredibly healthy lifestyle. Something gave it to him, and now they're I watched Bobby Kennedy talking about it, and I'm watching stuff that's been censored for the last while talk about the effects of aluminum on Alzheimer's and dementia. And, you know,
Yeah.
I just looked at the study, guys, that came out of Oregon, that they took basic rainwater. It started in 2022. And the numbers of the different chemicals that were in rainwater that shouldn't be there were just staggering. What they're doing to you guys on the West Coast out there is worse than what they're doing us down here on the East Coast.
Yeah, we took quite a few samples, water samples already, and we have those results too. Yes, absolutely. We have someone here. Troy, go right ahead.
Yeah, hey, I guess I'm a little bit more optimistic than Peter. I don't think that Tim Houston's gonna have a sweep down here. Today, I was involved in a protest at Tim Houston's office with a group called Green Nova Scotia First, and so it's really hard to fight the government with their media machine and everything. They've brainwashed everyone into thinking that climate change is a real thing, and that it's because I drove to the store. That's why climate change is happening. And so here in Nova Scotia, the government is backing these green hydrogen projects where they give money to these private companies to ship windmills from Germany over here. They rape the land. They put up these windmills. They provide power for these businesses to create hydrogen and ammonia to put on a tanker and send back over to Germany. And this is called a green project. And so instead of us trying to stop this and convince people that this isn't a good idea, we're putting a spin on it that here in Nova Scotia, over 60% of our energy comes from coal. And so if we're going to be a green province, then we should be using these windmills for our own energy. And so that's the spin that we're putting on it at Green Nova Scotia First. And we seem to be gaining traction. We had 2 newspapers were there today at our protest. There was an interview on CBC yesterday about it, and there was another reporter that was there from the city also. And Peter, one of our candidate, Bobby Lee, was there, and so he spoke with one of the papers as well.
Right on.
And so he was speaking about the corruption in the government. So I'm not quite sure exactly how much they're going to cover of what Bobby Lee said, but he was there today and he was speaking about it. And I think that we all have to do stuff like this. We have to get involved. I ran for municipal office this time. I didn't get in. They reelected the 2 old goats that were in there before. And so I'm hoping that this one guy, he's been in there for 24 years. I got my fingers crossed that he doesn't have 4 years left in him and we'll have a by-election. But we really do have to get involved. I'm aware that the government is corrupt and that people that get in there can be corrupted, but I still have faith that there are good people out there and that there's good people that are running for office. And if we can get them before they get too corrupted, then I think that we can make some changes. And so I just want to put a little positive spin on the end here.
I'm trying to get Troy to run as an independent down here too, just so that you guys know.
Yeah,
Anyway,
I was still feeling defeated from my loss from town council because the next election came up like a week later. So I wasn't in the right mindset to be trying to do that. But there are 3 candidates running as independents. One who's already in right now as an independent. Yep. She kicked out of her party for speaking out against them, and so she ran as an independent last time. She got elected, and there's 2 other ones that they ended up using the auditor from another party that couldn't get their candidates together in time, and so they used their auditor. And so there are 3 potential independent candidates this time. So that's good.
Yeah, so that's a start, guys. And our goal down here in Nova Scotia was to try to get 8 to 12 in, and 8 to 12 probably would have given us control of the provincial government. And it's why the premier broke his first piece of legislation, which was a set election date. And Bobby Lee Dillman, Bobby Lee was an activist in regards to medical marijuana use. And he's just a guy who stuck his hand up and said, enough's enough. And he filed for a criminal investigation inside our Elections Nova Scotia. And that's part of what we're working on right now. I'm surprised to see Troy on here. How did you see him? Anyway, so, it's like Stella said, what's the point of trying? Well, here's the thing is, we're going to have the lowest voter turnout probably like maybe in provincial history, because a lot of people feel that way because they feel their vote doesn't matter. And so after talking to key people all across Nova Scotia, and Troy was one of them, is that the folks in Nova Scotia were looking for a legitimate option. And I bet you it's the same thing out there, because people are saying, well, who are we going to vote for? You know, the leaders of all three parties down here, to be honest to God, truthful with you, they're either a criminal or an imbecile. I mean, straight up. There's no, I say it to their face, doesn't matter. And so that's what we're faced with. But, and Troy's, you know, Troy will agree with what I'm saying here down here too, is any of those three that get put in back in power, if they're not in a minority position, we have serious problems. If Tim Houston gets back in with another majority, we're going to see stuff change because he needs a mandate. The problem is, because they kept roughly 20 people off the ballot, is that as independents, they're not going to get a mandate, and we'll have all this stuff blow up in the press, hopefully prior to election day. But you got to get involved, and you can't, and everybody has a different skill set, right? And some people are good speakers, some people are good investigators, some people are good at pulling together groups, some people are good at getting people to come out and do things they might not otherwise do. But you have to look at everything you're doing like a military operation, and give the people who are good at what they do a project to work on. And with enough people doing this, we can turn this stuff around. And especially with what just happened in the US, right? And Trudeau's just got to go in this next election. I mean, or we're done for it, right? I'm trying to be positive here, guys. And I hopefully down there, like we had a gal going to run down there. Sue had a good shot against him down there, because I was looking at the numbers. And, you know, Sue tried to get her papers in, Troy down there, and couldn't get her stuff through either. And what Bobby did initially, Bobby showed weakness inside the government, because when he stuck his hand up, we figured out what their weakness was, and we're using it against them, because now all these people who didn't get through have a Section 3 charter violation. That's one straight up. We've talked to a number of lawyers. That one's a winnable one, and we'll make some changes. Well, when you go back to that forest fire thing, initially, while you guys asked me and how geoengineering, I want to pull back to that, is how is it affecting forest fires? You have to ask yourself, if they can, and the government, all the data can prove that they can use weather manipulation to make it rain, and why won't they make it rain over existing big forest fires? Because they're pushing a climate change agenda that, if they admit that they made a mistake, they won't have a seat in the next government. They'll be wiped out. So what, it's like, a lot of times with a big lie, you have to just stick to it. That's my story and I'm sticking to it. And that's how they box themselves in. So groups like you guys, right, in touch, with Martin Broadman down here, with Troy, and there's other groups that meet out in BC. It's just a matter if everybody wants to find one another. So every time you do one of these, when you invite in new people, try to invite some new people. Now I know about your group, right? So I will be pushing your group now through on other venues of people that I know. And then Jim Ferguson, who is just out there in the UK right now, he's got the fastest growing platform, I think, in the world, and it's called Freedom Train International. Most people don't even know about it in Canada, but it's the fastest growing freedom organization in the world right now. And like I say earlier today, I was talking to people in Australia and different countries, but it's why Reiner got a hold of me initially. And he had told me that what's happening in Canada is happening all around the world. But what we were trying to do in Nova Scotia was set an example and create a blueprint that's workable in every province. And if it's workable in every province, it's workable in every country in the world with a parliamentary system. All you need to do, you're not going to form a party and take over government. You're just going to strategically get enough independents responsible to the people who vote them, who get, and ideally as a community, you get to pick them. See, most people don't realize in politics, they set up small committees, and their job is to go out to find people that they can manipulate and control, right? And they're pliable. And when they'll get in, they'll sit down, shut up, and do what they're told. And every now and then we get someone like the independent we have down here, Elizabeth Smith McCrossan, who actually did what she was asked to do by her constituents, and they just threw her under the bus and then backed up over and squealed their tires going over on the next go by. So she went and became an independent and won with 68% of the vote. and she has a voice and she can get things done. And she's made enough friends in the press that she can actually be effective, but she can't control legislation. And the only way people can do that is get involved. So
Can
go
I
ahead,
say
ask
something? Oh,
questions.
sorry.
Go ahead, Stella.
I think Zoom was there before me with his hand up, so you go for it.
Oh, sorry.
I think Martin just didn't put his hand down again. Go ahead, Stella.
Oh, okay. Oh crap, I forgot. Totally gone out of my head. Hang on. Sorry. No, it's gone out of my head. I should have written it down. I've got about 3 things on my mind at the moment. Sorry. Forgive me. It'll come back in a minute.
So Jeff made a point here, by the way. He says it's not easy to make it rain. The conditions have to be just right. That's true. Are they doing spraying as in defoliation? And my understanding, the data I've looked at it is they're doing everything from controlling paths of hurricanes to causing it to rain in areas. There's all kinds of things that are being done. The technology today is advanced to the point. Yeah, I mean, where you guys are up there, like up in Alaska, the HARP machinery that they were using was actually, they were putting billions, not thousands of watts, billions of watts of energy into the ionosphere to try to drive weather currents and weather patterns. So obviously the conditions have to be just right, but the technology's there to be able to do things. So,
but the technology has to be strong enough to steer or to manipulate the winds.
that's right.
Obviously, they aren't. So there is not enough power to steer a hurricane, for example.
Actually,
Peter?
well,
I'm sorry. Peter, are you getting your information? Can I ask what you're basing that on, please? Whose information you're basing that on?
that last, it's all HARP data, all research that I've done in regards to geoengineering down in the U.S. on that last major hurricane that it took those areas. I forget the name of the hurricane, but it went up into a mountain area and wiped out a couple of towns.
Helene.
That's right. That couple of towns that actually were 100% against increasing mining capacity on the largest. I forget the mineral. It's the mineral that you require.
It was lithium. That was the rhetoric that was going around.
Well,
but when you look at,
so what I looked at, Stella, I watched. It's much like what Jeff said. He's monitoring a bunch of different things, but the information that I watched was they were showing bursts of energy all across that area, and it looked exactly like I was watching all these different people with weather backgrounds and people that I track in different movements, and they said that weather bursts, all they were doing was they were creating changes in pressure gradients that caused that you can't steer anything 100%, but you can somehow pull things in a particular direction by creating an imbalance in air pressure. And they were showing graphical bursts of energy that were being fired off across the US, and it was showing up like lights, like street lights. It was like dark, and it was showing all this bang, bang, bang. And some of the equipment that the US military has right now is that most people aren't aware of, and I forget what the sites where I was looking at is on it. It's absolutely staggering what they have the capacity to do. My understanding is even up in Alaska, they're shutting down the bulk of that program. Am I right on that, Betta? Are they?
They sold the HARP in Alaska in 2016 to the University of Alaska, Bettina? Because
Yes,
the military was sort of done with it.
Go ahead, Stella.
It's not possible. A lot of this equipment is very misunderstood as to what the capabilities of it actually are, because you look at some of the technical jargon data, and unless you really fully understand the technical side of it, it looks like a lot, when they say billions of this and that, but it's like it's not actually quite that simple. I'm not an authority on a technical sense, but I do very much encourage you to go to climateviewer.com. That is Jim Lee's website. And please have a look at the things NexRad you were describing, all those little blue blooms that people like Dane Wigington shout about. It's not It's not at all what he is saying. NextRad has got hardly any. It's almost equivalent to your microwave. There's just no power in that, so it cannot steer stuff like it's being claimed. So it's just a matter of misunderstanding. I really encourage you to do that, or you can check my channel out on YouTube, which the links are in the description there. That's me and Jeff's show as well.
Okay.
There's a couple of shows on there that you might want to look at. There's some about chemtrails as well. But we do meteorological forensics, we call it. We really look
Okay.
into, deep dive into events, like do backcasting as opposed to forecasting. And we look into things, and it's a process of elimination, really. And Jim explains things at a much deeper level than we do. So please, check that out.
So I got a question for you, Stella. In regards to some of the major fires that have occurred in North America over the last number of years, the burn patterns are nothing that I've seen over my entire career. What's your take on I'm trying to think, is it WE?
WEF?
No, not WEF. It's a it's space-based lasers.
Oh, the
the DEWs.
The DEWs.
DEWs.
What are you? What's your take on DEWs?
I can't. I'm still on the fence, really, because like looking at places like Lahaina, there's a lot of very inexplicable things. Even looking at the towers that fell, inexplicable. So I'm certainly wouldn't diss anything to do with that, but that's sort of a separate issue to the weather modification and the chemtrails and all that sort of thing. Very different. I wouldn't put it past them at all to do it.
But it can be used to ignite forest fires.
I'm sure it could, but I personally don't have any proof for that. I only can go on the speculation.
Yeah, so I haven't been on the ground investigating, but I watched one guy who had investigated, I think, over 160 of the fires in California. And I looked at all the burn patterns. And I had never seen burn patterns like that in my entire career fighting fires. If a house burns down, given the certain conditions, down to the concrete, and I watched where and pine trees, especially not evergreens, but especially the pine species beside the homes that don't burn. And then I see liquefied aluminum wheels and vehicles that are burned, melted into the road, and trees beside them didn't ignite. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
And so I look at a bunch of these different things and I said, okay, and what happened in the air? Why, when you look at weather patterns, is there a possibility that anything happened? When you look at your geoengineering and what's being sprayed in the atmosphere and the amount of light that's being deflected, and the whole idea behind geoengineering, a lot of it is to try to modify the amount of light being reflected or absorbed. And the basics behind it is they want to control weather patterns. And then if it's not being done with microwaves, it's not just microwaves. One of the other big things that they use in modifying, they're trying to modify, and maybe I'm wrong on this, but I've read like several hundred different documents on it, is where they use vibrational frequencies to create patterns that will affect a number of different things, even to the point of earthquakes.
VLS, yep.
So what ends up happening is okay, so there's technology available that a lot of times that the public will never be made aware of, that the military has been using for 10 or 15 years before anybody in the public knows it even exists.
I would say probably longer than that. Absolutely. I would never dispute what you're seeing with the fires. And just to add to that, with the fires that came here in Australia, it was very interesting to look at sort of the path of everything and then look at like the high-speed rail plans and the smart city sort of things. There was a lot of correlation there. So I am definitely not giving them a pass because they're evil mother Fs. But it needs to be separated so that we know which bits to go after and not sort of everything thrown into the same basket. That's just my point, so that we're not wasting our time chasing our tail in areas that aren't actually a problem.
So
I mean,
there's
lots of problems. But
all I do still is look at the preponderance of evidence. When I look at things, I say, I'm at the point in life where I don't believe in coincidences anymore. And when I see things that happen, and especially when there's billions and billions of dollars at stake, and it's a weather-related event, and everything seems to already be in place prior to the event, and then the event happens, and then billions of dollars get made in transactions, and people become exceedingly wealthy. All of a sudden, you say, "Wow, man, what a coincidence! Imagine them being set to purchase that land and do all these things, and what if there was technology that could influence this?" And I can't
I'm
say
100% on board. Yeah, sure.
all I
I
say.
totally agree with you. Yeah.
So, and there's things that I can't definitively say. It's like all those fires, a lot of those fires, same thing in Quebec. I wasn't on the ground, but I was told by military people when those 13, they could have been DEWs that started the fires, but more than likely they were a setup, and they were a timed incendiary device that was designed to completely leave no trace. You know, like phosphorus melt down 2,500 degrees and doesn't leave any residue that you'll find at a forest fire scene. And then even if it was tied halfway up a tree and they were all ignited electronically with remote firing devices, you could say, well, we went in and from the ground, it looked like it was a lightning strike. Virtually anything can be produced that you want to do. So even though I wasn't on the ground, all of the circumstantial evidence points to the fact that this was a man-made incident. And statistically, it would be virtually impossible to happen under those conditions. And then, like I said, I don't believe in coincidences. What do you think the odds are that the wind was blowing into New York at that time? They stayed buried in smoke for a week. They pushed the agenda. And all you heard on national news in Canada was for 3 weeks, forest fires are out of control. The only way we're going to save it is with a carbon tax, blah, 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 blah. So
Oh yeah, I totally agree. I think they also are very good at taking it, well, never letting a crisis go to waste, to quote that. So when things do happen, they're very much in there straight away, ready to go and take advantage of everything at every level. So, but yeah, I agree with you on the fires for sure. But they are separate issues, really. But anyway,
So
thank you. Thank you for that.
Yeah, not a problem. And then take a look at Jasper, guys. They were warned that Jasper was going to happen. 100% guarantee, not if, but when. I mean, it was straight up.
That's right.
And actually, there was a bunch of steps that could have been taken. And I saw some comments there on forestry practices, things that should have been done that weren't done. And so if you're a malevolent person with a bigger agenda, how do you disguise it? Well, you can always say, well, it was just stupidity, when it wasn't. It was coordinated, and it was coordinated to look potentially like stupidity. So anyway, guys, it's
Martin.
been, we're closing in on midnight.
Sorry. Yes, I know. Martin, you've got your hand still up?
Just quick, an observation. Did you guys ever look in the latest studies which came out in Switzerland about the Sahara dust? And these are really good studies which compelling prove what's in this dust, which was never there before, because the Sahara dust, that's a well-known phenomenon. When I was in Switzerland, when I grew up, we had that every so often. But that whole environment changed, and especially last year and this year, there were pretty impressive studies which came out in regards to that. So maybe that's something to look into as well.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. Yeah, yeah, you're right, Peter. It's getting late for you, so it's 8 o'clock, not quite, but almost 8 o'clock our time here in BC. If there is anything else you guys would like to address, well, feel free, just 5 minutes, and then we'll close it off. If not, then I would like to certainly thank you so much, Peter. This was absolutely incredible. I was just totally overwhelmed. Thank you for that. I put a whole bunch of links in the chat as well. If you're interested, then I will send this over to you. I will save the chat anyway. And the recording will be up on YouTube and on Rumble. Yes, you're right. We do have a Rumble account as well. That was absolutely incredible. Thanks again so much, Peter, for coming on tonight.
So what I'll do is I have a couple of other talk show hosts that may be interested in interviewing you. and there's some people that you may want to reach out to. But now that I've got your contact stuff, and if anybody has, I posted there earlier my email. Then you've got my contact stuff, so you can send me anything you want. And if I find something that either refutes something that I said or supports something that I said, I'll send it along, because I got no problem being corrected on stuff if I'm wrong. Right. The only issue is I try to do as much in-depth research as I can, and I have access sometimes to some military stuff that most people don't have access, that I'm not supposed to have access to, and I don't want to talk. But the reality of it is, guys, is get organized and get in contact with as many like-minded people as you can, and then you unfortunately are going to have to get involved more than at this level. And if you have a skill set, focus on it and help people where they're at, and get involved and realize there's no white horse coming to save anybody. If you think there's someone coming to save you, probably tomorrow morning when you're in the washroom, you'll be looking at them in the mirror.
That's
Because
right.
Yeah.
the only person that's going to save you is yourself. Tell you the truth. Anyways, it's been a pleasure. I really appreciate the invite. Thanks very much.
Oh, you're most welcome. Before we close off, I would like to share my screen quickly and show Peter's book here. So this is obviously the title of the book, The Redneck Conservative. So if anyone is interested, there it is. There you go. Okay.
And by the way, guys, there's a trigger warning for liberals. So if you have a liberal that's going to read that, I recommend they get in a boat, go out in a lake, because their head will explode, and that'll be another forest fire you'll have to deal with out there.
Can you put a link for that book, Bettina, into the chat by any chance? Please?
Yeah.
It's just on Amazon, guys. If you punch Redneck Conservative into Amazon, you can get it in an ebook, paperback, or Audible, and it's
All
on
right.
some other things too. If you punch it up, you'll find it. Anyways, and if they decide to put me in jail or C-63 goes through and they ban that book, the plan on what we had laid out is in the back of it, and that once you have it, they won't be able to take that away from you. Anyways, thanks again, guys. I appreciate your time.
Thanks very much.
You bet.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks so much. Goodbye.
Thanks.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Hey, Troy. See you guys.
Bye.
See ya.